Aum Sairam. Hara Hara Shankara, Jaya Jaya Shankara. Episode 16. Shri Mahaswami-The Sage with Eyes of Light. The Diary of a Seeker of Truth. Dr.Serge Demetrian. Dear devotees, now we shall listen to the second part of this divine book under the subtitle The Pilgrim's House. Kanchipuram, Saturday, 18th July 1970. Vyasa Puja. I started for Little Kanchipuram where the Vyasa Puja was to be celebrated. I reached the local mutt by 9 a.m. The young Shankaracharya, under a medium-sized festive umbrella, had just returned from the river Palar, where he had completed the ritual of the shaving. He was preceded by an elephant and by musicians, and some 200 persons also followed him. They were rather nice, but they seemed to me not very religiously motivated. In front of the main entrance, a coconut was broken on the ground as an offering to Ganapati, the deity with an elephant's head who wards off the obstacles. Sanskrit verses were recited. I also offered 2 bananas to the elephant. It is a female with a lame leg. It has been given to the mutt as it could not work. As soon as it gets a piece of money, it gives it to its elephant driver and delicately poses its trunk for 1 second on the head of the donor, which is taken as a blessing of Ganapati. It is impressive to see what these animals can do with their trunk. For the ancients, the trunk was a hand, hasta in Sanskrit. From this comes the Sanskrit name for elephant, hastin, which can mean the one with a hand. I was instructed by the gods to stay just on the threshold of the gate, as foreigners are not allowed inside the compound. I gripped a post, trying not to be swept away by the thick crowd that swirled around. By this time, Shri Mahaswami came from the same Pala river, but by another way. He had to enter by a smaller gate as he is not anymore the head of the mutt. I am well placed and I see him at close quarters. The crowd came near and almost pushed him, but it is a thing that obviously does not trouble him. He is so different. One would say only he really exists. The others are mere shadows. Shri Mahaswami's head and face are shaved. His features are finely marked and there is a particular gentleness but also a surprising energy which is that of a powerful man, capable of anything but completely the master of himself, that is, without being needlessly rigid. He accepted all the prostrations, low bows, salutations, the ritual offerings of fire with calm and gracious signs of his head and with his hand open in front of him. He was being stopped every 2 or 3 steps, but he finally reached the gate. The short barrel form drums, mridangam, of the traditional musical party, fearful with their sharp and dry nose of broken bones, along with the long black flutes, nadashwaram, that send pitched and nasal sounds, launched an orderly attack against my ears. One should be accustomed to high decibels. Despite the resounding obstacle, I continued to hold on to my position. My stubbornness for a good cause was recompensed. Shri Mahaswami passed by a couple of feet in front of me. I catch a glimpse of his profile. The non-shaved eyebrows protrude. However, what impresses is his mouth. Both his lips, often curved into a so lovely smile, are now pursed up and cast in front in an attitude that expresses determination and force before a fight. One could almost think that he enters the mutt for a vital confrontation and not for a religious ceremony. I send someone inside with my offerings of flowers and fruits and stay without moving at the point permitted by the god. Unluckily, I am positioned towards the left, near the party of the musicians. In return, from time to time, I can see Sri Mahaswami at the bottom of the courtyard at some 20 meters on a low platform, a kind of stage between two whitewashed mat palisades. A curtain occasionally closes the platform. He will officiate. In front of the podium, sitting on the ground, were 2 rows of monks, sannyasins of different ages, clad in ochre. Behind them, there was a corridor between 2 wooden fences where thronged the devotees who wanted to have a closer look at the puja. Behind them also, towards the gate where I stood, are 2 or 3 rows of aged persons. Then a space of some 12 meters where the public sat. I sprang upon my toes, asked some to sit down as they stood up without thinking of those behind them. I leaned in all directions, endeavoring to see the service. The traditional story of a Tamil devotee came to my mind. Being an outcast, he was not received inside the temple where Shiva, his favorite deity, stood. He prayed with such consistent fervor from outside the temple that the large granite statue of Nandi, the bull, that is traditionally situated in front of Shiva and thus obstructs a direct view from the entrance door to the sanctum, moved sideways so that Shiva could bless his devotee. Subsequently, he became a renowned saint. The story does not mention anything of what happened to those who prevented the aspirant to sainthood from seeing his God. We are in India, and so we remember only the good. Finally, I have myself also displayed some determination, because I stood on my feet right to the end. 5 hours. It had not been easy. The party of musicians, observing that a foreigner was among the onlookers, surpassed themselves. If my tympanums did not burst, it was certainly due to a special protection of Sri Mahaswami. In addition, there was no thought of eating or even drinking something. Sometimes one becomes an ascetic much as one becomes a hero by sheer force of circumstances. When the crowd thinned a bit in the last hour, I could come nearer at the only angle from where it was possible to witness the entire spectacle from the front. I now understood what is meant by a real puja. When Sri Mahaswami was tracing certain signs with his hands above his head, a current mounted along my back. The entire atmosphere was charged with a purer air, which had its source on the platform. As usual, for me, only he was alive. I had already heard that during some services, he was known to look like Shiva himself. This time, he was akin to a Shivalinga. He was a flame. There was no doubt of this. The heat of his tejas was supremely contained. Otherwise, it could have burned to ashes those who looked on. Nearing the end of the service, the air became so full of power that one could easily forget one's own name. The end arrived. The climax was the offering of the lights. With the curtain now open, I saw Sri Mahaswami rising and showing with ritual gestures the numerous lamps and scintillating grand bronze candelabra which was blazed with higher and higher flames. I could hardly distinguish where he was and where the ordinary flame began. I would say that Sri Mahaswami was the more powerful of the two, as he was endowed with a commanding lustre that could subdue the flickering flames. The puja onlookers were friendly towards me. They left a place for me they talked to me, and someone offered me water. This proves that the do not touch of the traditionalists is somewhat exaggerated, and more so that these prohibitions are no longer adhered to by the younger generations. The service is over. I intend going back to town by leaving all to chance, as I do not have sufficient money with me to afford the luxury of a rickshaw. I pass once again in front of the mutt, and although I observe a small group of devotees who seem waiting for someone, I do not give this any importance. After a few steps comes a new recognition that holds me to the spot for a few minutes. It was enough to realize that the small group was waiting for Sri Mahaswami, who was just nearing the mutt. Had the new friend not restrained me, I would have been a loser. The life is full of such minutely organized fortunes. One must always be attentive. Destiny can guide us by signs which show themselves when one is not prepared. However, let us hurry. Sri Mahaswami approaches. He walks slowly and is nearly stopped at every step by the crowd. The people bow and prostrate. To adore a great sage coming out of a temple or of an important puja seems to be very auspicious. Could it be that in the interior of the temples or during certain offices or rituals they are reabsorbed into their own divine nature? After having seen Sri Mahaswami, I am tempted to believe it. I quickly chalk out my plan of action. I will prostrate, not exactly in front of him, but slightly to the side, so as not to hinder his progress. I take off my shirt, tighten my shawl round the chest, and I am waiting. He comes nearer and nearer. On his route, the crowd has somewhat diminished. I look at him and I think, if only he would turn his eyes towards me. Now it is the moment. At that very second, Sri Mahaswami turns his head towards me. I lean forward to start my prostration, but I still have the time to look at him. An instant I stay frozen. He has recognized me and seems surprised and content. What he had planted in my heart yesterday morning at the temple of the goddess Kamakshi bears fruits. He has also perceived, I think, that I have witnessed without turning a hair all the long hours of the puja, and that I have lived it inwardly. The lances of his eyes in a slow flight enter my own pupils. The immaterial thrust of these forceful projectiles must have carried also something of his seen body, as I feel Sri Mahaswami piercing me, gigantic, brilliant. He only exists. Having fallen on the ground in front of him, trembling with fervor and overcome by despair to see myself still bound to the transitory, I embrace in thought his feet. They only can save me. The traditional prostration with 8 limbs, Sashtanga Namaskara, is quite long. Coming up, I have still the time to observe his wooden sandals that had just left. Sri Mahaswami had waited for me all the time. I quickly dress in order to accompany him, following the example of others around. A temporary friend, a devotee of Vishnu, who pressed me to stay back and admire a holy statue, Utsavamurti, kept on a Garuda or golden bird that was being carried through the streets, intrigued, asked me, "Through what magic, sir, did you stop Sri Mahaswami in front of you?" I would have liked to reply, "Through love." I looked at him. He would not have understood. I kept mum, living with an evasive gesture of the hand. Sri Mahaswami, followed by a few assistants and visitors with whom he talked, headed through gardens and by lanes to the temple Vyasa Shantaleshwara, his place of residence during the observance of the Chaturmasya, that is, in the opposite direction of the route I had taken twice yesterday morning. From time to time, the people were prostrating at his passage. Someone threw the water of a large vessel so as to clean the road in front of his feet. I took a few drops after he had passed through and sprinkled them over my head. While walking barefooted, I tried to follow as exactly as possible the trace of his sandals, the traces of God with form, the visible deity. I noticed that two assistants carried the baggage of Sri Mahaswami, one dark and rough blanket, two mats and a few metal boxes, the kitchen utensils box probably. Another assistant kept somewhat nonchalantly in his hands one pair of heavy worn wooden sandals of Sri Mahaswami. At a stop, I discreetly took a speck of dust out of one of them. Something has passed into me through these minute grains. Sri Mahaswami stops now and then. I can see his profile clearly. He is totally relaxed compared to the moment when he entered the mutt before the ceremony. Although he stood 5 hours during the ceremonies, he seemed very little affected by fatigue. A poor old woman tries to touch his feet, but the assistants interfere in time. However, Sri Mahaswami halts so that she may greet him in her manner. On his expressive face, I am able to read an immense compassion, but also his helplessness. Soon afterwards, a noisy drunkard stands in the way. Sri Mahaswami stops once again without a murmur and waits until the individual finishes his prostration. We reach the temple in the twilight. A powder of living gold departs from the reddish sun and enfolds the earth, the trees, and humanity. All becomes lighter, vaporous. These places, sanctified by the presence of Sri Mahaswami, have their own contribution to make in the divine process. Nearby is the ancient reservoir where one has to go down several steps to reach the water. Sri Mahaswami comes there often, sits in water unto his neck and prays. To whom does he pray, and for whose benefit? This evening he enters straight away into the white and peaceful temple. I stay behind and watch. Through the temple's porch, I notice that he is heading across the courtyard on the left side towards a small and squat construction without windows where he bends and slips inside through a narrow opening. Some visitors of the so-called superior caste come in luxurious cars that stop just before the gate of the temple. They carry, not without arrogance, rich offerings in the courtyard of the poor temple. They deposit the heavy baskets of plaited bamboo fiber in front of the entrance of the cave-like structure where Sri Mahaswami stays concealed. They prostrate, recite a list of demands as though in the front of a ticket office, and when they come out, sprawl on the seats of their cars and leave satisfied. In the night, which falls quickly in the tropics, Sri Mahaswami remains in his dark and cold shelter, a little oil lamp near him. After dining on 1 or 2 cups of milk, he will lay on a thin mat spread on the ground between slabs of stone, covering himself with his ochre cloth. The spiritual emperor of the world will have for pillow his elbow or perhaps a simple brick. Devotees, let us close this episode and shall continue to listen to the second part of Sri Mahaswami, the sage with eyes of light, in the coming episode, bowing at the holy feet of the Gurus. Aum Sairam. Hara Hara Shankara, Jaya Jaya Shankara.